Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Bari Norman from Expert Admissions, and I'm here with Sasha DeWind from Tutor Associates. And we are delighted that you're joining us this evening to get a first look at the college admissions and testing landscape for this year, 2025-2026. We are just about at the November 1st deadline, so it's early in some ways in the cycle, but we certainly have seen plenty so far and wanted to give some insight and some help as of now. So one thing that we'd love to do first is to take a poll as people are queuing in, just to kind of see who is here and what grade levels are represented. That will help us tailor our responses. So if you could let us know if you or your student, what grade you're in, that would be helpful. And while people are doing that and queuing into the room, if you have questions, we have a lot of questions from registration. So thank you so much for submitting them. I think you'll hear plenty of them as we go. And if you have questions as we're speaking, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will take a look and moderate that as we go and try to incorporate as much as we can in case anything comes up or if anything needs clarification. It looks like actually we're pretty close split between 11th and 12th graders. It's moving as more people are responding, but we're about 40% 11th graders, 33%, now it's 38, 31. It keeps moving. But anyway, we've got a few more 11th graders, but a close number of 12th graders, followed by 10th graders, and then 9th and others. So thank you very much. We will keep this in mind, knowing that we have a lot of 11th and 12th graders here. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Sasha, who can introduce herself.
Thanks, Bari. I'm Sasha DeWind. I am the Executive Director at Tutor Associates, and my goal tonight is to clarify questions about SAT, ACT, the differences, the logistics, how to deal with those difficult, tricky tests, and also talk about academic life for our children. I think sometimes we overlook that part of the process, and it's such an important piece of the college admissions process. And also to hear all about Bari's wonderful insights. They're always, I always take them away with me. So to start, I think we want to hear from Bari a little bit about what trends you're seeing, Bari, in this admission season or over the past year. What, if anything, has changed or is staying the same? And then we'll talk a little bit back and forth about the different things we're noticing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so even though it's early in the process, what we can see is certainly what the colleges are asking, what they're not asking. So something that's been interesting this year is just to see how essays have shifted, how supplemental essays in particular have shifted. There are some schools like UVA who have dropped the essay. Most schools, almost all schools, have kept the essay, but have made some tweaks. And so seeing that students are being asked even more so to really dig deep in the questions. We'll talk about AI later, but I think there's a lot of temptation with that. But the way that questions are asked and the way this process is designed is to stand out. And so really trying to do that through your essays, that's the one time you get to speak, is even more important now than ever. We definitely are seeing still, increased interest in the South and a more of an openness to it, not necessarily people who have to be there or need to be there, but just a real true openness and looking at schools there. And then, of course, the big Michigan news with early decision being introduced. I think that's going to be very interesting and have a big impact on highly selective admissions. And so that will be, and that has certainly impacted the way that people have strategized for early differently than they would have in prior years. So there's a lot going on. Obviously, there are governmental policies that are impacting things. We'll get to some of that. There were some specific questions relating to those things, but I think the sort of even more personal essays and the need for that. We'll also be talking in a bit about majors and kind of that stuff, and that has become also increasingly important. That real strategy behind where are you applying, how are you presenting, that increased personalization of the process as colleges are really trying to get at things in different ways.
So great. And we had a question specifically about trends with male-female ratios at colleges. Are there specific needs based on gender or anything that's
I don't really think nothing much that I've seen. I think also, listen, it depends. I think there was also a question about kind of even international interest and the way that policies may have, and we'll talk again about some of this later, but the truth is it depends where you're looking, right? So whether it's the demographic cliff, whether there are some issues with visas, if you look at when I say highly selective, I don't just mean Ivy League schools at all, but, generally selective, highly selective schools, there is no shortage of applicants there. And when people do get a sense that there might be a pullback, it's an opportunity for other people to jump in. And so we often see the opposite, which is increased numbers and interest in these schools. So I don't think, I certainly haven't seen anything with regard to male, female that's different from any other years. Certainly that is sometimes the case, and we take into consideration, is it a male or a female student applying? Are they applying ED? What are they applying for? But nothing that has changed that's, significantly different from prior years, and even still the same with international students.
makes sense?
Yeah. I have a question for you, Sasha, actually, which is we've got testing, which is a big piece of this process. It's come back for a lot of the highly selective or most selective places that had put it on the back burner for a bit. Can you speak a little bit, because this is a question that comes up a lot. Can we first talk about what are the differences between SAT and ACT? If we could just start there, and then I have a follow-up for you.
Yeah, of course. So, broadly speaking, these are two college admissions tests that have a lot in common. Certainly, schools, highly selective or not, have no preference between these tests. I often get questions about that. You can send either. You need not and should not send both. But you really are choosing one of these two tests. And almost all of our students, if not all of our students, are at least positioning themselves to score well on one of these two admissions tests. And the ways in which they're similar is that they're multiple choice standardized tests that are curved, and we can talk about what that means. And they test math, and they test grammar, and they test reading. And those things really are common to both tests. And while there are shades of differences in the content tested on the math, and they're important, and we'll talk about that as well, they really are testing those skills similarly. Now, the ACT has long been known for the science section, which is not a part of the SAT. So that is a big difference between the two tests, is this fourth science section. And even though the ACT has been shifting and changing recently and has proclaimed the science section to be optional, I will proclaim it to be not optional until Barry says otherwise. So I will still say that one of the biggest differences between these tests, though there are other ones, is the existence of the science section on the ACT. And to be clear, this is not testing a child's knowledge about biology or chemistry or physics. It is a lot like a reading comprehension for science. You are interpreting graphs and tables and experiments, and you are quickly digesting that information to answer questions about them. Now, a couple other key differences, since they are both testing grammar, reading, math, and we've mentioned the ACT is also, it has that science section. A key difference is that the SAT is adaptive. And what that means, it's digital and adaptive. You will take the SAT, or your child will take the SAT on the College Board's Blue Book app on a computer. They have a calculator built into that app, so you do need familiarity with the Desmos calculator, and that can be a drawback for some students. And it is not just digital, but it is adaptive, which means your child is given two modules, Module 1 for English reading, which are smashed together into one section, and Module 2. And how you perform on the questions in Module 1, there are easy, medium, and hard questions. How you perform on those determines which second module you receive. And the same is true on the math section. Now, this isn't in and of itself a problem, but many children find this difficult to navigate and anxiety producing. So it's something that, some of our kids really take to and they love, but others do not. And the ACT, while they are offering digital tests, they are still offering their good old paper tests, and they are not adaptive. They are not offering an adaptive test. So you just take your 4 sections, your English grammar, your math, your reading, and your science sections, and there is no weighted scoring. So everything is worth the same. Those are broad strokes, differences, similarities. And I guess I always like to say, even with the ACT changes, and I've been doing this for 2 decades now, even with the ACT changes, I would say the ACT is the stable test that doesn't throw a lot of curveballs at kids, but is offering more challenging math topics and more math topics, perhaps sort of harder reading in some ways. Certainly that science, but is more straightforward. And the SAT is like a fun or a not so fun ride you're on. It's tricky. It's good for kids who love puzzles and games, but it's less straightforward and sort of has simpler content presented in a more difficult way.
Mhm. Or is there, what is your recommendation? I have a recommendation. I'm curious to hear your recommendation of sort of when is everybody's different, of course, but if we were speaking very generically, when is the best time to kind of start preparing?
Yeah. Taking recruited athletes aside and kids who are abroad or doing special things over the summer or boarding school kids, the typical student comes to us to has a conversation in 10th grade. Maybe that's even in the fall of 10th grade. And usually our kids are taking a full length ACT diagnostic and a full length SAT diagnostic either over spring break of their 10th grade year or somewhere between that spring break and June when they finish school, or in early summer before they go off to their summer plans. Um, I would say it's never too early to diagnose, except it is because they have to get through a certain amount of math in order to take a proper diagnostic. They need to read at a certain level and they need to be developed at a certain level. So, it's really a 10th grade, end of 10th grade, or summer before 11th grade. That's when we're diagnosing, that's when we're picking the test. And then when your child actually takes the official test, there's such a wild variance, or wide variance, I should say, between children when it comes to that. There are kids who take it in the fall of 11th grade, the winter, the spring. The fall of senior year is a very popular and important time for our kids to retest. And that's really customized depending on the child and where they're starting, where they need to go, what their schedules look like, and who they are.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the fall of senior year to have that in your back pocket as your true last time. We just see such nice jumps, like meaningful jumps for us from the admissions perspective. It's not because we want to, like string it out long, like we all want it to be done as soon as possible. But I think that people often go in thinking about it as like either I need to be or I should be or I'm going to be done by the end of junior year. And that starting earlier necessarily means that you're actually going to finish earlier, which I've often find is the opposite case, unless you're truly somebody who's just naturally gifted at these tests and can go in quickly with little to no prep and just kind of get your score and leave. But 95+% of the kids, even the ones who are going to score very high in the end, do extensive prep. And so being developmentally in the right place and being ready to be able to give sort of your best score usually doesn't happen until a little later than people might ideally like. But I really encourage people not to think of end of junior year as like kind of the like end or what it's supposed to be, because we really get such great stuff from that beginning of senior year. And there's not much that goes on even between the end of junior year and the beginning of senior year.
Well, and that speaks to a couple different things. I mean, mindset is so important in these tests. And the kids who do tests, as you said, sort of naturally well, they tend to be really confident and they tend to take a little bit of pleasure in solving this puzzle, right? And the more confident a child is, the more likely they are to get it done earlier because they don't have that anxiety. And that's some of the development you're talking about, Barry. And it's also one of the reasons why the end of junior year specifically is my least favorite time for kids to test. That's not to say they're not testing in the fall of junior year or the winter of junior year and then coming back to it over the summer. There are even some summer test dates. But the end of junior year, when I was told to take it many, many years ago, was when I was at my most burnt out, right? At the end of 11th grade. And you can't redo those grades, right? You need to knock out that history research paper. You need to nail your exams. And you're exhausted just from the sort of realities of 11th grade and test preparation and college visits and all the things. And a tired mind, an anxious mind, a mind who does not believe they can do it, and certainly just fatigued, overwhelmed children do not
I
do well
say
on this test.
just being fatigued, like nothing even
That's it.
else has to be
That's
going
it.
on.
Yep.
Absolutely. Like, and I think also this also connects, and we're right in the thick, we're almost at November 1st. So, early decision, we've been working on applications and essays since the summer. There's often, even when you get to the application and essays phase, this sort of, just like we want to get it done, we want to get it done. And trust me, like, so do we, right? But it has
Indeed.
to be really good. Like,
Yeah.
you can't sacrifice quality for speed. And saying you want to get it done and pushing it doesn't make a kid produce a better essay. In fact, usually they don't produce as good an essay because they're rushed and because there's this pressure like, oh, get it done, as opposed to, no one's missing deadlines, no one's handing anything in on the last day or anything even close to it. But I think this kind of sometimes obsession with just wanting to be done with it and forgetting that really being done is doing it well, because this is a competitive process. So you can technically check it off your list, but if it's not an essay that's going to really hustle for you and stand out, then maybe you're done, but is it going to work? Maybe you're done with the test because you say, I said I'm going to be done by the end of junior year, but do you have a really usable competitive
Yeah.
score in this crazy post-test optional world where, kids are getting in the 1500s and not able to submit, their scores to highly selective schools? So, it's hard, it's hard. People, I understand wanting to be done, but you can't lose sight of the larger process and what the real goal is.
And I think so much of that is, parents, I mean, Barry and I are both parents. We want what's best for our children. And it's part of why it's so important to have those really fun, encouraging, confident, kind tutors in your life, or Barry in your life, or one of her counselors in your life, because it is very challenging as a parent to go slow and allow that to happen. But that's part of why particularly teenagers need that support outside of their parents. And I speak as a mom who absolutely plans to have help and a team around my daughter. Barry, we talk so much about the ACT and the SAT, and they are very important. And maybe you can even talk about how and when they are important. But I spend so many phone calls with parents about this, and fewer than probably should about the transcript, about the grades, about that piece of it. Can you speak about the role of the transcript and how that fit in with these scores that we know are often very important as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So anybody who's ever been to a college info session and they put up the slide, what are we looking for? What's most important? The transcript is always going to be at the top of the list. And the transcript people always think about the grades, of course, as you should, but the transcript also has your courses listed on there. And that's really arguably the most important thing. Which courses are you taking based on what's available at your high school? To what extent are you challenging yourself given what's available to you? So they're not comparing you to another school, whether private or public or down the street or a boarding school. They are just looking at you in the context of your school. To use an extreme example, if your school offers, 15 APs and you've taken none of them but have straight A pluses, you shouldn't expect like great results. There's always the question of, do I take the harder class and get the lower grade? Or, if you ask that question in an admissions info session, they'll tell you to take the harder class and get the A, and they'll laugh. That's not helpful. Decisions about curriculum are pretty much like some of the most important that you're going to make throughout the process, because it can be the case that one class that you don't take or one class that you take at a level or not at that level can really just in and of itself impact the admissions decision. So I encourage everybody, so many people will say, we don't really have any choice, or it's really basically not. it's really important to talk to somebody knowledgeable about your course selection. So transcript is super important. The rigor of your courses, of course, the grades that you're earning. That's sort of the initial part of academics. Then scores, whether or not, if it's a place that either requires them, of course, if it's a place where it's optional, in general, I would say you want to try to submit good scores. What good scores means doesn't mean good in general. It means good for that school. You're going to certainly look at their mid 50%. Ideally, you're going to want to be at the upper end of the mid 50%. You also have to look at, for that particular school, what percentage of applicants submit versus admitted students submit. You've got to talk to a counselor to kind of really parse it out. Like, because at one school, it could be it's great. You can go test optional, really no downside to it. At another school, going in without scores really is going to change what we anticipate the decision is going to be. So the scores are important. The nice thing is that there are truly test optional schools. For everybody, it's different. So for one student, test optional can be a great route, and for another, it's going to be a harder one. It really depends. I mean, so much in college admissions is it depends. It depends on the student. It depends on what schools you're applying to. It depends how good of a fit you actually are, not how bad you want to go or how much you think you're a good fit, but how much they're going to see you as a good fit for their school. And so, the personalization of the process to each student, I can't emphasize enough. So it's hard to give generic advice, but transcript is super important, followed by test scores. And then if you can pass that initial academic review, then they're going to really focus and home in on how you spend your time outside of school and how you communicate that in your application.
Yeah, and I think that's ideally we are forward looking in our planning, right? We are thinking ahead and for certainly, I think you've said before, for the most selective schools, ninth grade counts, right? This is not many decades ago when ninth grade you kind of got to ramp up a little bit. And certainly there are schools for whom that's true, but we really have to be forward looking and know our children where they will thrive. I mean, I think that brings us a little bit to APs. You mentioned APs, and certainly we tutor kids for AP exams. You mentioned a school with 15 APs. Most of the New York City schools, not all, but most of them have done away
Um,
for eight. They don't have APs because they have really more rigorous, if anything, or equally rigorous advanced classes that they offer at their own schools. So, what is the role of the AP from an admissions perspective? And then I'll certainly talk about maybe how we think about APs from a tutoring perspective.
Yeah, so APs, if they're offered, they're typically going to be the highest level offered if they're offered at a school. IB may also be offered. Some schools offer both. Some only offer one. Many offer neither. Again, you're just going to be looked at in the context of your school. As Sasha was saying, certainly most, if not the majority of New York City private schools, they don't offer them at all. I don't care. Whatever your school has, they do have tiers of difficulty, of rigor. So whether they call it AP, they call it advanced, they call it intensive, it doesn't matter. Like, we and the admissions officers know sort of what the tiers are, and it will be looked at just the same. So if you're looking at schools or you're at a school where there are no APs, people sometimes get a little nervous about that, and there's absolutely zero to be concerned about with regard to that. But if they're offered, they're usually going to be the most rigorous courses that are offered, and you would want to take them in general. The colleges are looking primarily at the courses and the grades in your 5 core academic areas, which are English, history, math, science, and foreign language. Um, some schools will offer advanced levels in some of those tracks and not in all of them. That's okay too. Ideally, you take 4 years of the same language. 3 is totally fine. I don't recommend taking just 2. If you take, Spanish 2 in 8th grade and you're in Spanish 3 in ninth grade, that's your first year of Spanish. Again, are there some state schools that will count that as the 3rd year? Sure, but that's like an anomaly. I'm trying to be as generic as possible. But the AP and the IB and the advanced and the intensives, you want to try and take them when you can and when it makes sense. Now, Will it make sense? It depends what other classes you're taking that are or aren't advanced. It depends on what your other grades are. It depends realistically what we can think you might get in the more advanced class. Is it a class that is better to have on your transcript, even if it might have a slightly lower grade? Maybe, maybe not. Where are you shooting for? What are the other grades like? Again, there are so many things to consider. And not all APs are equal, right? So AP Calc and AP Environmental Science are not the same in rigor just because they're all APs. And that's a really important distinguishing factor as well. And so you really are thinking about what classes you're taking at what level and looking at the larger picture and trying to find this balance.
Yeah, and we had that's exactly, it's always about the customization of the child and the student. It's the same when we're talking about preparing children. And so parents call me all the time and they say, should we prepare for this AP exam? Should we take this AP exam? How much time should we put into it? We have a question in the the questions that were sent in. Is it better to take fewer and know a 5 is likely, or more when it may not be 5s? So many of these things depend. The first thing I'll always ask the parent is your child in an AP course? Right? So the AP courses are meant to prepare your child ideally for this test. And they're kind of like the period at the end of the sentence. It's not that the AP score is required for admissions unless you're applying to, I believe, Oxford and Cambridge. Barry, you can tell me if I'm wrong. We'll set the British schools aside for a moment, but for the states, the scores on the APs are never required. But if you're taking an AP class, it is certainly expected that you take the AP test. And so if your child is coming to me and they're in the AP class and they're doing well in that AP class, then preparing for that AP test makes a lot of sense. And it always makes sense when APs are on a 5 scale. Of course, nothing can be on the same scale. So we have 1600 for SAT and 36 for ACT and 5 on APs. But for highly competitive schools, a 5, maybe a 4, but a 5 is usually what our kids are aiming for. And I'm always thinking in terms of opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of putting another AP test in the mix? Is it a course they're already in? If your child's not taking AP courses and they want to sit for an AP, okay, that's fine. We do have kids at schools without APs who sit for AP exams, but what is that prep time to get that score, and what is it taking away from? How does that have an impact on their grades, their SAT or ACT scores, which are going to be likely very important?
And I think
So
also, Sasha,
um,
sorry to interrupt, but
please.
just at this time, like the other question is what additional information is this providing, right? If you have good grades and you have, strong grades, strong scores on the SAT or ACT, and now you're going to give them 5s, even though your school doesn't offer APs, what is additive for that, right? Like you have to really give some thought to why you're doing it. Now, might you want to do it so that you can potentially skip intro, Calc 1 or somewhere and go right into Calc 2 as a freshman? Maybe, or maybe there's another reason for, you want to skip intro to US history, right? And you're going to, but really think about why are you doing this and what is it offering, as opposed to thinking that necessarily just more testing is better, especially because typically the kids who are submitting these are kids who get high scores. It does happen where some students will score high on APs, numerous APs, and then didn't maybe score as well on the other stuff. But usually, if you have a bunch of high AP scores, you have the other stuff that goes along with it, and it's not really giving additional information.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always the cost is time, right? Your child has only so much time, and they are all busy with extracurriculars. And
Which are
um,
so important.
can you speak a little bit to the sort of what extracurriculars, what are colleges looking for when it comes to not the academic profile, but the child outside, once they've passed through that door, they've gotten their superb SAT or ACT scores, and they've got the transcript. What are schools looking for, and how much does that depend?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the vast, vast, vast majority, upwards of 85% at the more selective schools, of the kids who apply are academically qualified. They can do the work if they were admitted. Obviously, they're taking a small little number of those students. And how do they decide? So yes, you have to pass the initial academic review. Without that, they're not going to care about all the other stuff. But assuming that, like the vast majority of applicants, you pass through that first door, the decisions really are made on these softer factors. And what are the softer factors? How you've communicated everything in the essays, because that's the only way they're going to know it, is how you've communicated. That's how they're going to feel either connected or not connected to you. That's how they're going to determine, do I see this kid on our campus? Not could they be here and grab their grades and diploma and be a part of things and do well, but are they going to really thrive here and make a difference? And again, what does that look like at school A versus B? Can be very different, even if they take the same kid numerically. But decisions are really made based on how you spend your time outside of like classroom discussion. They want to know, how do you choose to spend your time? What do you do with it? What have you gotten from it? How have you transferred it beyond the actual doing of it? They want to hear so much. And listen, AI is helpful in a lot of ways. But one thing I think you have to be really, really careful, or it should be your own work. It should go without saying, but it really like sucks the soul out of essays. And we notice it when sometimes kids will submit a draft that clearly has relied too heavily on it. It's just interesting to me because in a process where the whole line is about standing out and standing out, the zeal with which people are leaning on AI, I'm just sort of like, people are kind of forgetting, like they're missing the script, right? Like they're just forgetting what this whole process is about. It will sound good. And it might even write it a little better than you could on a first draft. I mean, maybe not after going through some drafts, but really being able to connect is so, so, so important. I actually read this article yesterday from University of Illinois. And there were these two professors, and they had students who they could tell had cheated. And they sent out notes to these students. They got back apologies, and what do you know? They could tell, like, these all are kind of similar. They all used AI to write the apology and, contrition letter. And it's just like, people look at Reddit all the time. Like, do you not think that you're all submitting the same stuff? And admissions officers say it all the time, that they know what's happening in the Reddit rooms. They don't have to go in. They can just see it in the essays. And so I think there's a lot of good information you can get online. There's a lot of good information you can get in some of these chat rooms. And you need to write your own stuff, because the way that they are making decisions is based on how compelling you are individually to them. And if you're relying too heavily on these kind of group think stuff and these group chats and, AI writing it, even when you tell AI, make it funnier, make it this, it's still at the core the same thing. And people will get frustrated with how many drafts you have to go through to get it really good. But that's what's going to get you in, And so I just feel like, as much as you can, really think about, how am I spending my time? Why am I doing it? I really don't care what people are doing. Honestly, I don't care the what. I just care why. I care how. I care so what, but I don't care what you're doing. Do what you like. You will take it farther, further, if you're actually doing something you care about. And there's never a comparison when you read two essays. Even when we're helping you get it to a certain point, there's no comparison between reading something where someone really cares and feels connected to what they're writing about, and somebody who's just kind of writing, sounds good, they're saying all the right things, but again, compelling, no, right? And so this part about extracurriculars, almost all of the essay work that you're going to be doing is going to draw on how you spend your time outside of school. There will certainly be academic interest questions about what you're interested in, but you are far more frequently going to be writing about how you've chosen to spend your time.
Yeah, and I mean, these people in admissions offices, I mean, you and I, we can spot these things pretty easily, I'd say. And so I want to remind everyone that I don't think, yes, AI can be an advantage in doing research or helping you understand something, but it is just not a replacement for your voice. And I see the same thing in high school admissions. I mean, you just can tell instantly, and you have to assume that people in admissions who are very well trained, can see the same. So, I mean, I think that goes without saying that
Think of
that's
those, in admissions, we say there are flat apps, and those are kids who are smart and could do the work, but are just flat. There's
yep,
nothing that makes you say, like, I really want this student on our campus.
yep.
And I think that's what you get. You get things that sound nice and they sound good, and they're going to say kind of all the quote unquote right things, but they're not going to be compelling. And
Yeah, and
that's
that how matters so much. I mean, when I'm working with my eighth graders, I'm thinking the same thing. If you can't replace that actual excitement about something they care about, or curiosity, or that joy they're taking in something they love, which is why you don't care what they do. It's more how they do it and how they think about it. There was a question in the chat about scores. As more schools require test scores, how much are you seeing average scores drop for highly selective Ivy caliber schools? I think.
Yeah, it's still too new, right? Like, we still have places that a couple places just recently that have announced that they're going back to scores. So I think we'll see. The truth is, though, the mid 50% has certainly shifted, but anybody like me who has worked in this field on this side of the desk knows that what really happened after test optional is that the mid 50% range just really laid bare what you really actually needed. Because we
Right.
used to sit here and say, okay, people would say, oh, but it's a 29 to a 33, or it's, and we're like, a 29 is not going to work. I understand that in the published data it's showing, but like that is not going to be enough. And now you just kind of see what we were saying before is kind of really what's needed. So I don't know whether they'll shift or not. I mean, it makes sense they might a little bit. But I don't know how much it will. It might take a few cycles before we even see anything. But I think no matter, even if you see them shift lower, the same thing will be true from pre-pandemic when they were required. Yes, the range is widened, but as just a straightforward typical applicant, should you be looking and saying, "Oh, I'm at the bottom end of that range," that means that I'm good? Absolutely not. So I would kind of
Yeah.
think of that as just sort of noise.
And there's been no shift in the last 10 years. I mean, beyond 10 years, but I'll just give 10 years as a framework. When parents call me and ask me what is a good score for X, and we look at those ranges which are published, I haven't changed my answer, which is that I want you towards the top or above that range, right? And that's because I'm giving a generic answer. Are there kids who get in that range? Of course, 50% are getting into that range. There are kids who get in below that range. But I'm always going to say that because that's where you're safe. That's where Barry's going to say you should send these scores. They help your academic profile or your
Point hasn't really gone
reputation.
up higher. The lower point, it kind of closed
It
a bit.
moved
So if
up.
it opens back up, again, it's not going to mean that's a competitive score. You should
Sure.
have to look at what, you have to kind of be realistic about what you're looking at. And so I would stay the course and don't get distracted by this other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just take a look at our questions. We had questions about ED, EA. You mentioned Michigan at the beginning. I love what big news in our world is.
I know.
It's breaking news for us. But can you talk about the role of ED and EA? I know that in our past webinars you've talked about how many students are sort of how many seats are going in ED or EA. Can you talk about trends there and how important ED and EA are in this
Yeah, so
process?
listen, early decision, which is the binding one where you have to go if admitted, it will always give you a good leg up, meaning it's going to be probably most likely, unless you have like, again, an anomaly where somebody needs to see grades out a little further, which again is a very, very rare case. It is going to be your best shot at getting into that particular school. And I don't care what they say in the info session, like it is your best shot at getting in. Now, does that mean that it's easy? No. Does that mean that the school that you just like the best, you should apply early without thinking about, am I a good fit? How do I look academically? Like all the other things you should be considering. No, like you've got to look at everything in context, but early decision is going to give you the biggest boost, but you want to use it to your advantage. You don't want to overplay your hand and waste it. And you also don't want to go for like a low hanging fruit that you could have gotten anyway in regular. So it's again about the balance, but ED will be your best shot. Depending on the school, EA may be neutral, but it almost always will be somewhat of a boost. If the school also offers ED, EA is going to be less of a boost than the people who are willing to commit. And EA, early action, is the one where you apply early, you find out early, but you don't have to commit to go until the spring. And so you're going to get some boost there. You know, I always say to people, with the exception of Georgetown, which is always the exception to everything, really apply early action if it's available. You know, like you should. That, generally speaking, is going to be smart strategically. And then, you know, there's also the issue with ED, the one that's binding. Remember that you have to go if you actually get in. And I know a lot of students feel like I have to find an ED because they know that there's that extra boost. So I've got to find somewhere that I can apply. And many students will find a place as a result, right? But some students won't. And like, don't force it just because it will be your best shot at a particular school. If you get into a school and then realize, like, either, oh, well, now I really wish I knew what would have happened at this other school or two schools, or you don't feel super psyched to go, then it's a trap. And it's no good. Like, so what, you got in, like, you're going to be miserable in the long term. So really make sure that if you're going to potentially lock yourself in, that you're doing it at a place that you really want to be. It's okay if you like a few places and this is just one of them. It doesn't have to be like the love of your life that you know is above all other schools, but let it at least be among the ones that you like a lot
Yeah,
and that you would be really happy going to. Otherwise, even though it is riskier and, you know, I would see it through, because the worst thing is to be in a place and then to feel kind of just like trapped and bummed about the fact that you had no other options to explore or to
yeah,
kind of. So it depends how you
absolutely.
look at it, but it definitely is a strategic advantage for sure.
Absolutely. There's been multiple questions about super scoring scores, which is really, to keep it really simple, just mixing and matching your best scores across test dates. And so if you know, on the SAT, you're mixing, we'll talk about whether or not how much this is true and whether or not you can do it. You're mixing your best verbal score out of 800 and your best math score out of 800 for the best super score. And on the ACT, it's your best sort of composite or average, because that 36 score, which does not include the science anymore in terms of the composite, though we're still taking it, we're still sending it. They will give your best sub scores. And there's always questions about, is it better to send fewer scores but not as high of a score, or many scores with a higher super score? And we got a question about that. And I know there's an added layer about self-reporting. So Barry, maybe, I mean, I get this question all the time, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the benefits of super scoring, the limitations of super scoring, and then how self-reporting works.
Yeah, I think, again, so here we are again with the most common response. It depends, right? But let's talk as generically as we can. But
Yeah.
I want to say that it's so important that you're aware of the nuances for every single school you apply to, because there's sort of the general advice, and then there's what will make sense at each specific school, not only because of what their policies are, but because of what your profile is. And so we may have two kids applying to the same school and give them slightly different advice on some of these things because of the particulars of what they're doing. But with regard to super scoring, so like Sasha said, that's taking your best scores from different test dates. Now, first, does the school you're applying to super score? Not all of them do. Um, the other piece is self-reporting. So self-reporting is exactly what it sounds like. It's the self-reporting of your scores, meaning not sending them directly from the testing agency. What is the benefit of that? Well, you don't have to pay for the score reports, sure, but the strategic benefit is that when you go on the Common App and it asks you to report your scores, SAT or ACT, they only ask for your best section scores. They do not ask you for the date for your two super score dates, and you have to list all the sections. So you're not showing them the lower score from one date and the lower score from the other. You are only showing them your highest section
And that's
scores.
for the SAT
Right. The
specifically, just to be clear.
ACT, right, the ACT, you are still reporting your highest section scores, and they are asking you for your highest single sitting composite. They are not asking you for your super score ACT composite. They are asking you for your highest single sitting composite, even if the school or schools you're applying to will super score those individual sections to give you a higher composite. In the SAT, excuse me, you just report the two sections. They don't ask you to add them up in any way, shape, or form. So you have to think a little bit about strategy with regard to that. There are going to be some colleges for sure that are going to require you to send official test scores from the testing agencies. If you have to do that, then you will be sending the full test date. So if you get your best SAT from two different test dates, your super score, you have to send all the sections from the two dates. They're going to see them. Same thing with the ACT. If you got it from 2 or 3 test dates, they're going to see all of the section scores from all of the test dates if you have to send official scores. When you self-report, you do not, if a school says we allow you to self-report, you do not have to send official scores during the evaluation and review process. So they are only going to see your highest as reported on your common application by you. And then at the end of everything, when you've gotten your admission offers, when you've decided where you're going to go, there will be a verification process where they then ask you to send your official scores to verify that what you reported on your Common App is accurate. So the strategic advantage to self-reporting when it's allowed is they never see all the other stuff. And that's great. Self-report when you can, don't send official scores. However, when schools require you to send official scores as part of your application for admission, just remember that they're going to see everything. And just you have to assume that there will be some judgment. Again, no matter what they say, that there may be some judgment based on the larger testing profile.
Yeah, and it's listen, I know there's lots of parents out there who talk about their kids, the one and done kid. I know it happens, of course, but it is typical to take this test more than once.
And
And
fine, not even typical, like
yes,
great, no one
yes,
cares.
do it. Yes. No, and no one cares which date you hit your score, by the
Right.
way. They don't care if it
No
happened.
one cares if it was early junior year or the beginning of senior year. They're just looking, is this score a hindrance or not? Do we need to be concerned about this score or not? Nobody cares about the percentile. Nobody cares about the date or when it was.
Correct. So much of it, because you don't always, when you're starting this process, know who super scores, how they allow self-reporting. The goal is never to show, ideally, that we're never sending a set of scores or positioning ourselves to be like, oh, I've had kids be like, do I even have to take the verbal? I already got my 770. I'm like, yes, you have to take the verbal both times. You may have to send that whole set. And certainly the ACT is a little trickier because you still have to get that composite for self-reporting, which I think is important.
Sasha,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sasha, can you say something about when students take like the real tests? Because I think people need to hear about this, the difference between sort of practice tests and like some people are very eager to like, let's start taking it. And it makes sense. Like, let's start taking it so you can get familiar. We don't have to report it. There's no downside. Is there no downside to starting and taking real tests early? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Of course. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, so much of this, especially for teenagers, but even as we get older, is psychological. Okay. So even if you are safeguarded against having to report a set of scores, um, there is a very big difference for having a teenager have a bad practice test, which by the way is hard enough for them. And really, they struggle with that, than having a bad official test, even if we're not sending that score. Now, the other thing about practice tests, which we offer every single weekend, right? In person, remote, like that, we can do it all the time over summer breaks, all the time, is that you have a feedback, right? So you receive that you have the test, you can go over it with the answers, and you have an actual feedback loop when things don't go well. Why didn't it go well? What was happening the night before that test? What was happening during the test? Did you forget all your strategies? Did you forget to eat the snack that you packed because I made you pack a snack, but you didn't actually eat it, which is such a key part of that snack? So I think there's just like Barry said, we want to get it over with the essays, but it's not over with unless it's good. It's the same thing with official tests. It's not about getting it done early. I did see a question about boarding school students, and I know my boarding school students and my kids applying to boarding schools are often signing up for sort of round the clock school, and they don't have the same time to prep as the day school students. Now, that's a situation where, and I mentioned this before, we customize things around that. They might do a big intensive summer push and then come back and do things over the break, right? It's not about rushing it, it is about customizing it. But we can't rush to a bad result, right? There's just no point in that. And there's something about the psychology of having it on your official sort of record, even if you're not sending it, that really hinders progress going forward. So, I think what we have to remember, particularly with testing and with academics too, is we're dealing with teenage brains, right? They are under a lot of pressure. They put a lot of pressure on themselves, even if they don't seem like they are. And we have to be thoughtful about all the inputs that go in as they are preparing to do something challenging under pressure. And I think so few, tutors often know the strategies. I know lots of tutors who are good at teaching academic math, but who have no idea how to teach the sort of procedures and processes and patterns of these particular tests. But even if a tutor knows how to do the math content and knows how to teach the ACT math, they also need to understand teenage brains. They need to understand how to help a child manage anxiety in concrete ways. How do they manage fatigue? I'm a big chocolate covered espresso bean girl, but that's not for everyone. We have to actually deal with that mindset. And so, to Barry's point, it's not about rushing and getting it done wrong. It's about doing it at the right pace, and getting the
I
result we
do
all
think
need and
that
want.
that urge to like, we just need it to be done because there's all these other things, right? I mean, this is why everybody talks about this process. It is challenging by definition, and we can make it less, stressful, but we're not going to be able to take away all the stress of a process that almost by definition is stressful at times. We can make it fun. We can make it a whole lot less stressful. We can make you feel better and more confident about going through the process and what you're doing and the decisions you're making. We can help you understand that you'll be able to see like what's going to happen at different schools. But it doesn't mean that if there's real frustration or real stress or real challenge experience that it's gone off the rails. Like a good essay takes a lot of drafts, not a lot, but it takes more than two usually, right? Like it's going to take multiple drafts. It's going to require digging deep. You try something, it may work, and then or it may not. It doesn't mean you failed at it or it's again going wrong. You're trying to get it at a certain level, where again, it's going to really hustle for you and work for you. And none of that happens quickly, unfortunately. I mean, we want to be done more than you. We're doing it times, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So it's really, really important to remember that like stress and frustration are going to be probably part of this process at some point. Something snags everybody. Maybe the essays are easy for you, but the testing is where it gets you. Maybe the testing was the easy part, but these essays, like you're like, I get straight A's. Why can't I kind of understand how this works, right? Having the support to get you there is important, but the psychology of it, as Sasha was saying, is such a huge piece. And
So,
that desire
yeah.
to just kind of get it done is misguided.
And as parents, it's hard, but we have to tolerate that we can't take it all away. We can hire great tutors, we can hire Barry, we can make this process a little gentler, a little bit clearer, I think, always a little more transparent. But some of it's just not fun, and we have to tolerate that that's part of what this process is and
And
part
that's
of.
where parents can really come in a great, I mean, we obviously do what we can do, but we don't live with them, right? So
Correct.
you always will know them best, but being able to be like a steady, supportive, presence and let them commiserate, right? Validate. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
hard. I know it's like the fourth draft, but you know what? It's getting better each time. Like trust that they know what they're, that how to guide you and all these things. Like you don't have to always say, oh, but it's fine, or, it's going to be fine, or this, or try to act as if it isn't annoying and frustrating and whatever it may be.
100%. And we
Uh,
say, and we're like, yeah, this test is not fun, and and we're
Right.
going to keep going. So
And
we
we'll
only
say,
have,
yeah, this process is so ridiculous, but yeah,
it
this is
is,
how it works. Here we go. Let's do it.
right, that's
We can
life, right?
navigate it. We don't
Yeah,
have to
there's,
agree with it, but we can still navigate it.
yes, 100%. We have about 5 minutes left. Now, I see there's a lot of questions about specifics. Please email us. Barry and I are always here to talk about your child. Some of these details are very tricky. The self-reporting, ED2, there's millions of questions. We want to answer all of them, but I want to end with sort of a bigger picture question, Barry. We got a lot of questions about President Trump's policies. We got a lot of questions about international students, and the impact, if any, this has had on the application process, about students, application rates, anything you can say about that.
Yeah, I saw that we had a bunch of questions also relating also to sort of the demographic like cliff, like the declining number of 18-year-olds and our applications going to go down. I mean, listen, again, if you're going to look at the real full broad spectrum of the colleges and universities in the United States, yes, you're going to see some colleges close, you're going to see some of them struggle. I think generally speaking, the people who are listening to a webinar like this are applying to schools where there's going to be less, it's going to be felt less. It doesn't mean not at all, because people listening are still going to be applying to a broad range of schools. I think one thing that's very interesting, because with hearing all that has been going on in the news and just with different policies that have shifted and changed, Harvard just put out their yield for last year. They had just under 84% yield, 83.6%. So they're not hurting. People have asked, are people going there anymore? People seem to talk about saying I'm pulling back, but is that kind of showing and working like in real time? It doesn't appear so at Harvard. The other thing that people have asked about is international students, right? We had delays with visas. We certainly had an environment that didn't feel or wasn't inviting to international students. Harvard's yield for international students was 90.3%, so higher than the overall yield for their pool. And only 8 international students chose to defer. And so I think what we're seeing is that there are, certainly things happening in the news, but I think if you use Harvard as sort of an example, and I don't think it's much different from the conversations that I've had privately with admissions folks, is that it's really not any different than it has been in prior years. These schools are so sought after. It's not to say that some of these brands can't suffer to some degree, but when push comes to shove, people are willing to set some things aside when it's certain schools. And so I do think, will we see some broader trends really truly in higher education? Yes. Is it going to be at the places that most people are listening here? Not so much. You'll see, again, a little bit, some things, but I don't think so much that like strategy should shift, and the way that you think about this process needs to kind of get turned on its head.
Yeah, and I think so much of, I mean, it's so every time we do this, Barry, so much stays the same, right? I mean, yes, there are changes every year. There are different essay questions. They admit, you see admissions offices and SATs and ACTs responding to the world in front of them, right? Changing their tests, changing their questions, but so much has stayed the same in what our advice is. And perhaps this is sort of how we finish things. So much is customized to your child, customized to the school. For us, when we talk about timelines, when we talk about starting scores and ending scores, and all, everything should be customized to your child, and then in the admissions process also to the schools.
Right. I mean, even for the same kid, like that, we got a question about like how does choice of major impact, right? And it's like at some schools, it is so important. Like you really need to think, and not just think, what am I interested in, but really dig into things and figure out what makes sense strategically and what makes sense for you personally. And other places, it's like, it doesn't matter at all. Like who cares? And it really is a zero factor, but it can be different for each student, and often, almost always, school to school, even within one student's list.
And that's why you have to call Barry tomorrow and get her advice.
I mean, listen, the process is, it's not logical often, but you can understand, even if you don't agree with it, you can understand how it works and you can navigate it successfully. And so you may not agree with it. It may not make good sense to you or me. But we know how it works. It is what it is, and we move forward. And you can be authentic and strategic at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And so when you realize that, and you realize that there's a fair amount of predictability to the process, it doesn't feel as stressful, and you can kind of be smarter about what you do and the decisions you make and feel less stressed and calmer about it too.
I think that's completely true for the testing and for the academics as well. And I think it's a nice note to end on. Barry, thank you so much for doing this with me. It's
Thank
always
you.
such a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. For the questions we didn't get to, please feel free to reach out individually to us. And thank you. Have a good night.
Great night.